Okay.
My advocate isn't here, but his name is Derek Ledesma, and my advocate criticizes the legitimacy of the three strikes law. He says that it negatively impacts the states that enact them, and his three claims are that they cost California taxpayers millions of dollars. His second claim is that that it fails to reduce crime rates, and his third is that there is no apparent consequences of the three strikes law. What my refutation is that his recently passed propositions render his claim outdated, insinuating that there's an impact on states enacting the three strikes law. My counterclaims are that it actually costs California less, and it reduces the crime rates and the criminals in prison in California prisons. And there are social consequences. There are social consequences, but the three strikes laws don't cause them. For his first claim, he made the statistic that it cost California $500 million to implement this, but when I looked it up on the California budget, it says that the Corrections and Rehabilitation Department, or the budget, is only $11.9 million, which is less than $500 million, and it's decreasing to $10.9 million this year. It only makes up 9.7% of the budget, and it's the fourth largest part of the budget, the first being education, which is a good thing, right? He talks about crime and how applying it to all the tough on crime attitudes, and how applying this to all criminals is adequate and reasonable. I think we need to teach people not to repeat the same crime despite external forces such as starvation, no home, and no money. Employment rate is higher than ever, and instead of putting people in prison for this longest time that the three strikes law was doing a decade before, it's doing what it's doing right now is letting people, because it's reducing crime, it's letting people out now. So recently, there's these three propositions that were passed: Prop 36, 47, and 57. And what they did, especially Prop 36, was release 2,000 to 3,000 criminals in California jails, reducing the number of people in California prisons. In addition to Prop 36, there's also court orders like the implementary cap, which says that there's this cap of 137.5% that they have to fill. Well, recently in 2012, they only have 134% capacity filled. And I already bled into the second claim that he made, that it reduces crime. That it doesn't reduce crime. It actually does reduce crime, and I already talked about that. And what the governor expects from his budget is that the jails are expected to see 1,000 inmates reduced per year with the Proposition 36 and the new implementation caps. The other propositions, Proposition 47, requires misdemeanors rather than felonies for sentences regarding property and drug crimes, instead of like the previous requirements where they do imprison you for those crimes and they sentence you like really long, like 25 years minimum for such a petty crime such as thievery and what I just said, drug crimes. But he didn't put the propositions in his argument. Grab the slide. In addition to Proposition 47, Proposition 57 is, which is in the process, maintains compliance with population cap, federal court oversight, and the establishment of incentives for criminals to participate in rehab programs. So Proposition 57 is trying to make jails or like prisons more accepting to other alternatives to just rotting imprisonment. His third claim was that there's no apparent consequence of the third strike law. But there is, but it's not. There are consequences for people who get out of jail, but it's not the 3 strikes clause that cause it. It's actually other things. He names different demographics. First of all, it becomes the majority of his third claim's evidence. He lists that African Americans are more likely to be detained longer in prisons than any other race, such as Hispanic, Asian, or white. And yes, there are more African Americans in prison than any other race, but that doesn't mean that they're being detained longer. And it's not the 3 strikes laws that are detaining them. It could be other reasons, such as like where they were situated at first. They could have been. Again, there's this, most of the people guilty of the 3 strikes laws are people who are guilty for thievery and drug abuse, and if a lot of the people he says that come from there are criminals because of those crimes. It's not because they just want to do it. It's a whole different story that I don't have time to divulge in. And the statistic that he put, most of them are very outdated, such as as I said, the 500 million. He couldn't find it, and the statistics on the demographics. Well, out of the 6,894, which he neglected to put, 46 are African Americans, 25% are Hispanic, 23 are white, and 5% are other, and according to Sacramento Bee. And as I said, their 25 sentence was not because they wanted to be there. It was other reasons, and that's all I have to say.
All right, well, you start off pretty well identifying what the structure is going to be, but I think you get a little bit lost on that structure when you start kind of randomly talking about some of the evidence that's being presented. There's an argument that costs are being cut someplace, that the crime rates are down, that and the social consequences, they're not related to 3 strikes. So you're kind of previewing what your counterclaims are going to be. Your cost argument, that's a pretty substantial discrepancy if the budget is only $9 million and he's talking about $500 million. My guess is that somebody is misreading their numbers here, and there's some confusion, and as a consequence, it's a little bit hard to make any correct inference here on what's going on. If $9 million, or excuse me, $11 million is all the state of California is paying in its entire budget for the prison system, we've got the best deal in the history of the world. That sounds like a good deal to me. I think that there's been some confusion over what the numbers actually are, and that's something that you should probably follow up on. I think I'm going to have to follow up on it also. Then you get involved in this argument about employment, and I don't know how that's supposed to apply to anything that is being talked about here. I do think that you have a potentially good argument here about the reforms that have taken place. In other words, the advocate is saying there are all these harms that come from three strikes laws, and what you're saying is the stuff that was the objection of the advocate has all been modified by these kinds of things, and so as a consequence, you don't really have quite as significant an issue as what the advocate's talking about, because we have fewer prisoners in the jails, they have access to other kinds of resources, and in the long run, it's a decreased cost to the state. That's the way I think those arguments ought to be reading, and instead it comes along, you end up sounding like you're making the same argument that the advocate's making, that, oh my gosh, these penalties are so harsh because of these minor crimes and so on and so forth. And instead of contradicting the claim, you actually end up kind of reinforcing the original point. I think that you want to look at the big picture issue, and that is, what is it that these laws are supposed to have done? They're supposed to have reduced the prison population in some way. I'm not exactly sure, by the way, I would brag that the prison population's got a capacity of 135%, and we're under that at 134%. By the way, it still sounds like it's 35% over what we're supposed to have. So, your argument there is a little bit iffy on that particular point. And like I said, then you start talking about the propositions again, and you sound like you're much more simpatico with what the advocate's talking about than suggesting that we don't need this anymore because we fixed all those problems. That's the way that argument should be. You should say, we've addressed those kinds of issues, and so what the advocate's talking about is not a representation of what the policy is anymore. And all the stuff on the consequences thing, I don't know exactly what it is that you're saying. You start randomly presenting information about the incarceration rates. There's some more information about the number of prisoners, and then you give us percentages about those prisoners. And I'm not sure how I'm supposed to use any of that data, so you need to tell us what the impact of these arguments is. Presentation issues, you got, calm down. You got nervous feet like crazy. In my public speaking classes, I'd make you start over, because I can see all of your anxiety coming out. You're leaning on the podium, you're swinging your leg around behind you. You gotta stand up, look at us, and make the argument. We don't bite. We're okay, Well, he might, but the rest of us, we're pretty good, So, you're okay, you just need to kind of focus a little bit, and you got to condense your arguments some more. And speaking of condensing, I think we've kind of reached a spot where maybe it's best if we